Imagine standing at the edge of a misty hilltop as the sun rises behind towering stone walls. A drawbridge creaks open across a deep moat, and the sound of horse hooves echoes through the gate. Inside, flags flutter from tall towers, and the smell of bread baking drifts from the kitchen. Knights train in the courtyard, servants rush about with chores, and a royal feast is being prepared in the grand hall. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's a real place from the past, the castle. For centuries, castles stood proudly across the landscape like sleeping giants. Some were built to guard kingdoms and keep out enemies. Others were home to powerful lords and ladies, filled with music, laughter, and the clang of armor. Whether you're dreaming of daring battles, secret passageways, or royal banquets, castles hold the key to amazing stories from long ago. Let's step through the gates and explore the real history behind these legendary stone fortresses. Castles are some of the most famous and exciting buildings from history. They bring to mind images of kings and queens, knights in armor, grand stone towers, and moats filled with water. Castles were not just fancy homes, they were strong fortresses built to protect people during times of war and to show power during times of peace. For hundreds of years, castles stood as symbols of strength, safety, and royal pride across Europe and other parts of the world. The first castles began to appear in Europe around the 9th and 10th centuries. At that time, life was often dangerous. Kings and lords needed a way to protect themselves, their families, and the people who lived on their land. Castles were the answer. They were built on high ground or near rivers to make them easier to defend. Most early castles were made of wood, but over time, builders began to use stone, which was stronger and harder to burn. A castle was more than just one building. It was a collection of walls, towers, gates, and courtyards. At the center of most castles was a tall building called the keep. This was the main living area and the last place of safety during an attack. The keep had thick walls, small windows, and could be several stories tall. Lords and ladies lived there, along with their servants and guards. Surrounding the keep was usually a bailey, an open area with smaller buildings like kitchens, stables, and workshops. Around the entire castle was a strong outer wall called a curtain wall, and often a deep ditch or moat. Some moats were filled with water, while others were dry, but both made it harder for enemies to reach the walls. To enter a castle, people had to go through a strong gatehouse. The gatehouse had heavy doors, and sometimes a drawbridge that could be raised or lowered. It might also have a portcullis, a metal gate that could be dropped quickly in case of an attack. Castle entrances were heavily guarded and built to slow down or trap enemies. Many castles also had tall towers or turrets, where guards could watch for enemies from far away. Archers could shoot arrows from small windows called arrow slits or loopholes. During a siege, when an enemy surrounded a castle and tried to take it over, the people inside could pour boiling water, oil, or drop rocks from the top of the walls to defend themselves. Inside the castle, life was busy. Lords and ladies were in charge of the land and the people who worked on it. Knights protected the castle and the surrounding villages. Servants cooked food, cleaned, and cared for animals. Castles had great halls where meals were eaten, guests were welcomed, and feasts and celebrations took place. These rooms were large and decorated with banners, tapestries, and big fireplaces to keep warm. Even though castles were strong and protective, they were not always comfortable. Stone walls made the rooms cold and damp. Windows were small and glass was rare. Most light came from torches or candles. Bathrooms were simple and not very clean. Still, castles were grand places compared to the wooden houses where most people lived. One of the most famous castle-building times was during the Middle Ages, especially between the 11th and 15th centuries. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, William the Conqueror built many castles to control the land. These included motte and bailey castles, which had a wooden keep on a mound, motte, and a bailey below. Later castles became larger and more complex. Builders learned how to design stronger walls, curved towers, and better defenses. Some castles had secret passageways, hidden doors, and trapdoors. Over time, castles also became more like palaces, with fancy rooms, gardens, and decorations. They showed off the wealth and power of the people who lived in them. As time went on, however, castles began to change. By the 1500s and 1600s, cannons and gunpowder weapons made tall stone walls less useful. New kinds of forts were built, and many castles were no longer needed for defense. Some were turned into homes, while others were left in ruins. Even so, the idea of the castle remained strong in people's minds. Today, castles are popular places to visit. Some, like Windsor Castle in England, are still used by royalty. Others, like Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany or the castles of Scotland and France, attract tourists from around the world. People visit them to learn about history, see the grand buildings, and imagine what life was like hundreds of years ago. Castles also live on in books, movies, and fairy tales. They are places where dragons sleep, princesses wait in towers, and brave heroes go on quests. While real castles were not always magical, they were important centers of power, protection, and life. In the end, castles remind us of a time when the world was very different. They were built with great effort, stood through many battles, and held the hopes and dreams of the people inside. Whether standing strong or lying in ruins, castles continue to tell stories of the past and spark the imagination of people today.